Okay, now we need to work on that goods started and completed. Direct materials added, the equivalent units would come from above. It's the 19,200 equivalent units for material. Let's make sure we're in the right area. Yep, right there. And then the direct labor would come from the same conversion cost, equivalent units, and overhead is going to be from the exact same location above. Excuse me. Now we need to come up with the cost per unit. Direct materials is that $23 right there. Direct labor, $51.73. And the $41.38 comes from that cell where we've solved it before. And again, we can now multiply across, put a subtotal on it. Let me slide on down. And in this case, we have a real cell here, right? So we multiply the units times the direct labor, and we have a subtotal of total cost to process, and this is for the area that were started and completed in May. Okay, so now let's put a subtotal together, and my voice is cracking a little bit. I apologize for that. We get $2,578,229 of total cost transferred to finished goods. I'll slide back up, and now the last part is we want to account for the goods in process. Okay, so we'll do this same total again. We have direct materials added, direct labor added, and overhead to apply. And let's fill in what information we need to know. The equivalent units comes from above again. This time it's for the ending goods, so we're going to pull from here, right? So we'll get, in this cell it's 2,400, pulling from cell E32 above. And the direct labor, back to start part 1, for the ending goods is that cell, the 1920, that's F32. So I'll hit enter, and you'll see here that, let me slide down a little bit. In this cell you'll see it references cell F32, and the overhead will also reference cell F32. So I'll just type that in. And now we enter those costs again. Now we've already computed them above, so I'll just pull them from here this time. But really they come from, those cells right here. Okay. In fact, to be consistent, I will go back and pull it from the source rather than from a secondary source. Okay, and then of course it multiplies across, which it's already done. You see all that there. I'm just hitting the F2 key so you can see the formula. Take the cell of D61 times E61, and we have in this area $233,971. So now what we need to do is make sure we've accounted for all costs. And here we will simply take the sum of the cost transferred to finished goods, right, plus what was existing in cost and process at the end. And that 28,12200 we want to format as a where's my format cells? Right there. I'll just sort of show you what I'm doing. All I'm using is a double accounting underline. Okay, now we do want to make sure that that total cost to account for matched the cost given in the problem. And sure enough, we see it matching to that cell to the left of my mouse right there. Okay, now let's move on to part 3. And in part 3, we're asked to prepare the journal entry transferring cost of the completed units to finished goods inventory. This is pretty straightforward. So on May 31st, we need to make an entry. And I'm going to write this up top rather than to the left because I didn't leave myself a nice column here. but we would have a debit to finished goods and a credit to the goods in process inventory for the goods completed. Okay, now let's indent both of these a little bit so you can see what the entry is. One's a debit, and I'll indent this one a little bit more to show the credit. And what I'll do is write it this way. And then I think it's sort of clear what I'm doing here. Alright, that debit is going to equal the amount of the goods transferred to finished goods. Okay? And we would, of course, label what this is. This would be to transfer goods completed to finished goods inventory. And we would move that over and indent that to the left of the credit, so we have that. Alright, that takes care of part 3. Now, what are we asked to do on part 4? Part 4 is the analysis component, and they tell us that the cost accounting process depends on a number of estimates. Identify 2 major estimates that determine the cost of equivalent unit, and then in what direction might you anticipate a bias from management for each cost estimate in 4A, and explain your answer. Okay, well, the estimates are really the percentage of dollars allocated to overhead and the percentage of completed goods. Those are the most obvious ones that I can think of, where management has some judgment involved, where it isn't completely concrete. And the percentage of completed goods, in my opinion, is probably one where judgment is more the case. The percentage of dollars allocated to overhead, yes, they could make some changes there, but over time you'd hope that they were doing that the same way. So I don't think that can be manipulated period to period quite as easily as the percentage complete the various stages of production. And then to answer part B, what would management do? They might try to assign the least amount of overhead applied to their respective production process, or they might anticipate an underestimation of the percentage of complete, and this would allow them to manipulate the inventory value, if you will. If materials are added at the beginning of the process, then of course it's difficult for them to manage that, because the assumption follows the actual physical flow. If the goods are added, then you assume they're 100% complete. But what's typically the case is management would underestimate the percentage of completed, and then it would reduce the equivalent units of labor and overhead, and that would result in lowering the dollar value assigned to these components of ending inventory. And of course they want to show a low amount in ending inventory and not give the appearance that they've overproduced, and therefore decreasing, if you will, the turnover on ending inventory. Okay, well that takes care of part 2 of the problem. We've verbally answered part 4. Part 3 appears in these rows. Part 2 in the schedule above. And part 1 way up top. Thanks everyone.